stinking badges.
Just a little seed makes a big tree, standing on its own, thriving all alone. Just a little seed makes a big tree, grows so high, gonna touch the sky. Just a little seed makes a big tree, spreads roots deep, branches far and wide. Masonic lockdown in your hometown, Masonic lockdown. Can you hear me now? From the top down, soul shock down, state shakedown, mass breakdown, global orders, riding over borders, get behind your doors for the new world order. Dr. Evil and his needle, Dr. Evil with a master plan, a false vaccine, like a bad dream. The plant's a microchip, every woman, child and man. The plan to chip us all, to have complete control, the land, the sky, your soul. Peace like silence in the snow. You're free to do exactly as you're told. Obey, consume and die. And up to heaven for your pie up in the sky. Sleepwalking, dreaming. You best believe your lying eyes. Geoengineering, making more than patterns in the skies. 5G radiation, beamed to Earth from space by satellites. The scientists and media tricks, trying to tell me 2 and 2 is 5. Excuse me while I mention the strategy of tension, mass mind manipulation, psychological operation. The general population hypnotized right in front of your eyes. Drama and lies, look into my eyes. Just a little seed makes a big tree, standing on its own, thriving all alone. Just a little seed makes a big tree, grows so high, gonna touch the sky. Just a little seed makes a big tree, spreads roots deep, branches far and wide. Masonic lockdown in your hometown, Masonic lockdown. Can you feel me now? Masonic lockdown, soul shock down, state shakedown, a mass breakdown. Put your muzzle on, get back in your basket, get behind your doors, cause living here is drastic. Dr. Evil and his needle, Dr. Evil with a master plan, a false vaccine, like a bad dream. The plan's a microchip, every woman, child and man. The plan to chip us all, to have complete control, the land, the sky, your soul. Na 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 na, 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 na na.
We're taking things that are, genetically modified organisms, and we're injecting them in little kids' arms. We just shoot them right into the vein. But you don't have a choice. People act like you have a choice.
All right, I just wanted to use that as introduction. This is going to be a new podcast that I'll do from time to time. We'll see how often it is. It's not exactly easy for me to stick to a schedule, but it will probably be necessary at some point. But I will upload this, by the way, to all the different platforms that you see at the bottom of the screen if you're on YouTube. So Odyssey, BitChute, Rumbles, maybe even Minds. I think Minds might have a time limit. I don't plan to upload it to Gap TV. I think you need premium membership in order to use that. In any case, so this is going to be audio only, and it's pretty much going to be a lot of my general thoughts about the state of the world. And one of the things that I've started to notice that is really cementing itself is the realization among Americans who have long considered themselves liberals that their perception of the world has fallen apart. And I'll make it clear at this point that it doesn't mean that there's not people who will continue to be deluded into thinking that they have everything to gain by continuing to vote for the status quo. If you understand what I'm saying, there have always been people who consider themselves liberals and have thought of themselves as really upholding the values of personal freedom and different challenges to conventional thought and challenging the dogma and of various religions and traditions. Those people, I think, who are realizing right now that by continuing to support the status quo, whether it is the Democratic Party here or similar parties in other parts of the world, they're failing at their original philosophy in life, which is to stand for the downtrodden, people who are powerless and who are being exploited by the system or oppressed by the system. They are the system now. You can't be against the system if you are the system. That's why when you have a week like we've had so far, and it's certainly not a new phenomenon. I'm not trying to introduce this as a completely bizarre anomaly, but you're seeing basically something like the Grammys, which traditionally was just a celebration of the last year of music and the musicians that were, bringing their art to the public. It became a woke fest. Apparently, Megan Thee Stallion was there. I think Young Baby or whatever or Little Baby, whatever his name is. I'm not really a hip hop fan, so forgive me. So Little Baby, he did some sort of track that was complaining that real Black history was not really being taught in schools when he was a kid, which is it's probably the fakest news that you can get, because I'm pretty sure I'm a little older than him, and even in second grade during Black History Month, we had book reports to do. I even remember I had a book report to do on a famous Black history icon named Gordon Parks, who was a photographer and video maker and director, movie director, I should say, probably the most accurate way of describing him. So that was in second grade back in the early 90s. So people who say that there was never any depiction of Black history in public schools, I think that there is more than ample evidence to show to the contrary. So that was just one thing. There was also a Cardi B, apparently. She was doing her famous song WAP on the stage during this event, and this is on the backdrop of what is bizarrely one of the most censorious trends in American history. Right, we're seeing Pepe Le Pew being banned from, just being written out of the movie Space Jam 2, right? As if that is going to make the movie better or make audiences appreciate it more. You see Dr. Seuss books being suppressed. You see just this whole raft of censorship coming to the fore. The song that I played at the beginning was by Ian Brown, the former lead vocalist for the Stone Roses, one of the bands that came before the Britpop phenomenon. They were I think they were the shoegazing phase of British music, alternative indie music as it really was in the 80s. And he was complaining about the lockdown. He was spreading some of his personal views on the jab, if I can put it that way. And that has been booted from Spotify. All of this is showing that the people who have consistently shown themselves to be, they've portrayed themselves, I should say, as the defenders of the weak and workers, representatives, the liberal media, the liberal entertainment complex, all of those people, they don't really believe in a real liberalism at all. And I'll explain what I'm trying to get across here. We don't really think of liberalism in America the way that it's traditionally defined. You have to remember that America comes from the English or British Commonwealth tradition of constitutional order. Britain was one of the first monarchies to develop a separation of powers between a king and a separate body that became Parliament, right? And then gradually in the 18th century, it became a little bit more defined because Britain unified into the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, whereas before it had been three kingdoms: England, Scotland, and Ireland, and Wales, of course, is part of England. So the United Kingdom had two governing parties, the Whigs and the Tories, and the Whigs became the Liberal Party, and the Tories became the Conservative Party. And why? What's the difference? You might ask, who cares? Well, the Tories wanted to maintain the status of the traditional upper class, the people who already had nobility and titles and lands, or were members of the high church, the Anglican Church, and all of that. And they wanted to preserve the domain of traditional society, much of it Christian-based, as were all of the British at the time. There were hardly any religious minorities. It just depended whether you were Anglican or Catholic or some of the more fringe denominations at the time, Presbyterians and Congregationalists. But in any case, so religion was a main dividing factor, and so was class. And the liberals were against some of these divisions. They were saying, no, in order for British society to progress, we need to eliminate some of these divisions. We need to repeal some of these laws, such as the ones that disenfranchised Catholics from voting in British elections, right? Until I think the 1841 was it. If you were a British Catholic, you couldn't vote in an election. So the idea of liberalism was originally to emancipate people, give them more rights, end this class division between one segment of British society and then the rest of it, and create a society where people were more equal and could look at each other with a fair degree of parity. You didn't have to bow and curtsy to lords or whatever. And it never completely eliminated class divisions in British society, but eventually you have to realize, yes, the Catholics did gain the right to vote. I think the Jews also, in the same act, the few Jews who lived in Britain gained the right to vote, but it was at the same time. And gradually British society moved towards the Industrial Revolution. That's why the English-speaking world, partly why the English-speaking world is very well developed, because of the decision of the United Kingdom, and similarly things happened here in the United States, to embrace human progress, to say that tradition is important in how to govern the morality of the home, the morality of the smaller community. But on a wider basis, we shouldn't have to penalize people for blasphemy and for some morality crimes that are just not really in the purview of the judicial system, right? And it was really a very long process to do it. You have to remember that for example, certain marriages between different classes and religions were very rare up until the mid-1960s. And then, of course, there's the interracial marriage argument, which is an even deeper one. But the reason that we call liberalism what it is today is because of a perversion of the concept that has started in I would say it started more so in the 30s, right? And I'll try to explain why that happened and why it's also led to an even further, like an even more distilled perversion that we see today. So, like I said, the liberal tradition, as it originally was, came from the Enlightenment. It came from this notion that if we separate the church and state, and we allow people to have more rights separate from their religious identity, or later also from their racial identity. And now, of course, we do recognize that there should be legal equality between the sexes. If we do that, we can eliminate a lot of the tensions and resentments that prevent human society from going forward. They prevent technology and industry from benefiting society as a whole and leading to more human innovation. That's the downside of tradition. I'm not going to be one of these people. I'm not a radical, and I don't think most classical liberals are radicals by any means. But a lot of traditions, they develop out of archaic attitudes, and eventually they become an obstacle to what you want to do in the future, to your progress, right? Think of it this way. It's a superstition. It's a traditional superstition to not do things related to the number 13, right? The number 13 is considered unlucky. So people wouldn't schedule things for the 13th day of the month, or I believe that it used to be that there were floors that wouldn't have, there were buildings that wouldn't have a 13th floor, things like that. And it could be harmless up until you start to really, if you need something that's specified to the number 13, and for some reason, like let's say somebody comes into your store, they want to buy 13 pies. And you say, no, you're going to have to buy 12 or 14, or we'll give you a half pie for free or whatever. That would be a good workaround. But ultimately, people start to think you're kind of silly and superstitious. And that's one of the downsides of tradition. Not to say that all traditions are invalid, but some traditions, they do become an obstacle to human progress. So that's why liberalism helped the Western world, in particular the English-speaking world, to escape some of the malaise that had happened in European societies in the Middle Ages and throughout parts of the Renaissance, right? So that's one of the things that I think we should continue to see as a benefit of liberalism. But unfortunately, recent events don't let you do that, because liberalism, as the title of this podcast says, real liberalism has been usurped and is dead. And I use the word usurped. I've been watching Game of Thrones with my wife, and it comes up a lot. And I think usurped isn't used enough in everyday language. Did you usurp my cupcake while I was in the bathroom or something? That would be a great thing to say to your friend when they do something like that to you. But in all seriousness, the original ideas of liberalism have nothing to do with the minimum wage and things like that, and welfare benefits and all of these other notions that it's associated with today. Abortion rights is sort of related to it. I wouldn't say that you uniformly have to be pro-abortion in order to be considered a liberal, but the definition of liberalism has been warped and polluted by certain postmodern expressions of it, or modern expressions of it. Remember, I said it started, I believe, in the 30s, but some would say even earlier. So, of course, in the U.S., we had a new paradigm in liberalism in the 1930s when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected in 1932. And he instituted the New Deal, and he started a lot of big public works and different power grabs. And also, I believe he passed a law with Congress that would limit the individual's right to hold a certain amount of gold, bullion reserves. So that was considered in his time sort of revolutionary. He was saying that the government is here in order to mitigate all of the negative effects of the free market and the risk and all of the basically the the casino like atmosphere that had led to the crash of 1929, Black Tuesday, I think it was called. Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, we can stop all of that by instituting a lot of government regulation and major public investments, right? So public investments meaning that the U.S. government, the federal government, would start to take a more active role in the economy. It would create many more programs and public works and all of that. And that was where I believe liberalism started to get its modern connotation in the U.S., right? And I'll explain a little bit why it's different in Britain and how it also got polluted over there, but for different reasons. So basically, Roosevelt, while his policies did not end the Great Depression, they in the end prolonged it because, of course, price fixing and the dilution of the currency and all of these other fantastic Keynesian policies, they don't really build a healthy economy. In fact, they contribute to, in some ways, just a loss of freedom and also the stifling of real economic activity and people's hopes and dreams. Right? They make it harder for you to manage your farm because they're basically giving you a guide. You can't manage your farm the way you want to. You have the Department of Agriculture and his Secretary of Agriculture, Henry A. Wallace, doing it for you, right? And they basically tell you what to grow and how much. And I believe at some point when some of these farmers grew too many crops, they had them burned, and they would basically buy it up and burn it. So things like that were the product of FDR's thinking. Same thing with a lot of other industries, right? It affected both agriculture and industry, such that FDR was popular up to a point because in the mid-30s, there were all these other demagogues, and I say other demagogues because he was one too, that were starting to say, no, we need even more extreme interventions. There was people like Father Charles Coughlin of Detroit, who is a voracious Jew hater, but he also believed in basically the gospel of, I think it was called the gospel of social justice in the Catholic Church, hoping for a more fair and just society through redistribution of wealth. So they wanted to head off communism by doing it in a more spiritual and traditional sense, but the concept isn't too far away from socialism. And there were other extremists like Huey Long of Louisiana, and basically the Democrats and all the other big government people at the time started to realize, well, we might as well rein in some of these people because there's no telling how far this will go. So there were attempts to censor them. There were attempts to censor both Long and Father Charles Coughlin. I think Coughlin. I think it's pronounced Coughlin in the original Irish. But in any case, he was basically restricted by his bishop in Michigan from speaking about a lot of his views because basically it was just causing too much trouble for FDR. Not that I agree with Father Charles Coughlin, but FDR was saying that, this guy is stealing my thunder. I want to be the tyrant. Why do I have to deal with this tyrant in a robe, right? So they were fighting over who would usurp more power, right? And I believe Huey Long was assassinated. So that type of process where you have people basically saying, well, we as the government are going to solve your problems, but we can't agree. We're not going to be able to agree on who it is who's going to do it, right? That is how liberalism began to be polluted, that you see people who are taking away this notion of expanding freedom, and they're just saying, now we're going to expand the role of government, we're going to expand the role of the state in your life, and we're going to decide more for you, thereby doing the exact opposite of what liberalism originally meant. So you have these power struggles that have nothing to do with helping Americans. And basically, by the 1940s, of course, the U.S. is in World War II, and there is just this trend of the Liberal Party, the Democrats, being infiltrated increasingly by people like Henry Wallace, who by this point is a very strong Soviet sympathizer. He started out as a Republican in his life, but he moved steadily to a more radical socialist position. And there was a point where in 1944, if he would have become president, because he was vice president at this point, we could have been under the rule of an out and out socialist. That's how fast it became polluted by real leftism, which is not what liberalism originally meant. Right nowadays, leftists will say neoliberalism is the enemy, right? Because it supports corporations and it supports private property. Well, at the time, they were just infiltrating the liberal movement, because the liberal movement was very soft and very, they were very tolerant of these types that were coming in, and they wanted the power that some of these socialists were amassing through their different campaigns. And they figured, no, we'll just incorporate them within our ranks. And the same type of power struggle that's developing today between woke liberals woke progressives and neoliberals, the same thing was happening in the 1940s. In fact, Jimmy Dore, who's a pretty big far leftist, he talks about it periodically as well. Talks about how Harry Truman was the savior of the establishment, the elites, the corporations, because he was used to muscle out Henry Wallace in 1944. So basically, the gist of what I'm saying is that through FDR, the notion of what liberalism meant became completely turned upside down, right? It became identified with Keynesian economics. John Maynard Keynes I think he was a British economist. He believed that stronger public investment would help solve many of society's social ills, whether it was health, whether it was transportation, and indeed, he built the highway system. I think later under Johnson, not under FDR, they started Medicaid and Medicare and a lot of these other programs that today we just take for granted because they've always been around. Many Americans have never lived in a world where there is no social safety net. And I don't think it would really be possible to remove those safety nets immediately, like a lot of ideological libertarians want to. But the truth is that we see the results of that project of trying to have the state in charge of healthcare for the poor, trying to have the state in charge of healthcare for veterans and for Indian reservations, and all of those are failures, right? You see the quality of care in the VA was just terrible under President Obama. Supposedly it was fixed under President Trump. I'd have to do a little bit more research into that, but it was considered one of his premier accomplishments. If you're a veteran, maybe you could tell me a little bit more about it. But the problem that ensued was many of the liberals who had emerged out of the FDR era, they realized that there were limits to what they were trying to do. There were people who started to see that the more you expand the power of the state, the more dangerous it becomes when you're not in power. So you did see people start to break away from that in various different ways. Especially in the 1960s, you had certain Democrats who had always been fully, true believers in the liberal dream. People like Ramsey Clark, who was Attorney General under Johnson. And he started to say, well, all of this concentration of power at the federal level, it did lead to the Vietnam War. It led to a lot of other abuses of power overseas. It also leads to violations of civil rights at home. And he moved further to the left, but he started to realize, yes, liberalism, or at least this form of liberalism, has become an apology for tyranny, right? It just allows the state to amass more power. And when it makes a major mistake, they just say, well, we didn't know that it would turn out this way, like the Gulf of Tonkin incident, right? So there have always been people who are on the liberal side who start to leave and say, no, this is completely wrong. How are we continuing to do this? People like Daniel Ellsberg, the person who leaked the Pentagon Papers. People like I would say Daniel Patrick Moynihan to some degree realized that the welfare state was not curing poverty. It was actually aggravating it. And there were certainly people who said that the war on drugs was not helping to boost public health. It was actually just putting people in prison for recreational drug use. In some cases, not even recreational drug use. In some cases, it was people who were treating, an illness or pain by extracurricular methods, and they were being thrown in the slammer for it. So there have always been internal critics of the way liberalism is going, and they continue to call themselves liberals. But as a whole, the movement has become completely polluted, such that even this weekend, apparently Sarah Silverman said that she doesn't want to be affiliated with either political party. This is something that came up with Dave Rubin. He was talking about it. Rubin himself is a liberal who now calls himself also a conservative. And the truth is that the liberal movement has completely and utterly fallen apart. What you see today in the form of people like Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi and Governor Newsom in California is not in any way aligned with the traditional values of liberalism as it was conceived in the past. It's complete and total authoritarianism, right? All the other labels, left or right, don't really matter. Of course, they are aligned with the left, as they claim. There's people on the left that disown them. It's not a debate that I really care for. And there's really something that I think is important to note, which is that in Britain also the notion of being a liberal has completely evaporated, right? Because the Liberal Party, remember, I just talked about it, maybe it was 15 or 20 minutes ago, but the liberals of the 19th century were completely different from the concept that we see today. There were people like William Gladstone, who was possibly the architect of the British colonial empire in Africa and in other parts of the world. And you think any liberal today would want to be associated with that type of policy? No. But in that time, that was considered the way to bring the world forward, to spread the Western thought and ingenuity to what they considered to be barbaric tribes in dark continents. That was what liberalism was at the time. Today, we would definitely judge them to be, chauvinistic and racist towards the others. But no, that was the typical mindset at the time. And really, what happened to the Liberal Party in Britain? Well, it steadily became very similarly to the Democrats, just more unmoored from its original beliefs. And by the 1920s, it had been, again, usurped as the second party in Britain by the Labour Party. So steadily, the Liberal Party just became weaker electorally because people started to realize that, these industrialists and these people who are entrepreneurs, they don't necessarily look out for the interests of the common worker. So we're going to start supporting a movement that does that. That's why the Labour Party gained support. That's why other socialist movements in Britain gained support. And then, of course, more traditional Britons started to, they remained loyal to the Tory party, to the Conservatives. So steadily, the Liberal Party became basically a third party and a third wheel in British politics. They never again regained power. In the 1970s, they started to basically just copy the Labour Party in certain ways. They had a leader, Jeremy Thorpe, who was embroiled in a major sex scandal at the time. The Thorpe affair was one of these big breaking moments where Apparently, British society wasn't as liberal as people thought. I think it was accused of like having some relationship with another guy, maybe some personal aid or something. But the Thorpe affair, it made people realize that British society was indeed divided by class, but the divide between the Tory mindset, which is tradition and the nobility and the Queen and the monarchy, and to some extent the church, its main enemy was now these people who were calling for a classless society. They were calling for the seizing of all the means of production and the division of resources according to need in the form of the Labour Party. So the liberal idea was obsolete in Britain. It happened much different from here in the U.S., where simply people like FDR, they morphed the Democratic Party into something that it hadn't been prior to the 1930s. So why am I bringing this up today? Well, it's being usurped again. The Labor Democrat of the the 20th century, and to some extent the 19th century. The Labor Democrat is basically being drowned in the in the cesspool that it created. I think that the labor movement in America is indeed to blame for a lot of this, because they always look for their short-term interests, such as their pensions and a lot of the different benefits that they would get, such as closed shop and some of these other exclusive rights that they have in terms of for those of you that don't know what prevailing wage is, you should look it up. I think it's one of the most ridiculous things that there are, where you basically have to pay more than a premium value. The government has to pay more than a premium value for trade work, even if they could get it for cheaper from non-union workers. They still have to pay a prevailing wage. So this notion that the labor movement in America is still represented by a political party, I think is obsolete. The labor movement has completely bowed to corporate overlords who are spouting the same rhetoric as the would-be revolutionaries, and that's how you get things like what happened at the Emmys. That's how you get things like Disney Plus apparently deciding that there's a number of movies that have to be redefined. They're no longer children's movies. Movies like Dumbo are no longer defined as children's movies. They're defined as adult entertainment not adult entertainment like you traditionally think, but entertainment that's controversial, that you shouldn't be showing it to children. So I think it's in a different section on Disney Plus. And there's Dr. Seuss books that you can't get even on eBay. So you even have, by the way, yesterday I was reading, I get updates from the Boston Globe for some reason. I don't remember when I signed up for them, but apparently the Boston Globe is starting, the Boston Globe, which is owned by the same corporation as the New York Times, which is owned by a Mexican billionaire, Carlos Slim. They're starting a new newsletter called The Emancipator. And it is going to be essentially more of what you've been hearing about, intersectionality, different stories about it. And it's being led by people like Nicole Hannah-Jones, the person who started the 1619 Project. It's being led by people such as, I think Ibram X. Kendi is in it. So those of you that are thinking, this is just a passing phase. No, these people are being institutionalized, and it's something that was developed long ago by people who know how this racket works. And so all these people who have traditionally called themselves liberals, people who are political operatives, they've systematized it. It's no longer about guaranteeing the rights of anyone. It's about asserting a different moral orthodoxy. So you have them having this newsletter, and these are people who are already very well paid. Their careers have been feathered by all these different awards and Pulitzers and everything like that. And the Boston Globe is just saying, well, it doesn't matter that more and more people are realizing that these actors are just disingenuous and they don't take their own craft seriously, whether it's historians like Nicole Hannah-Jones, who acknowledges that her history as portrayed in 1619 Project isn't accurate, whether it's Ibram X. Kendi, who is one of the big writers within the anti-racism movement, and he's been caught on a podcast saying that he makes sure that I believe he makes sure that his daughter is not doing things that are not consistent with her gender identity as a girl, like, because he fears that she's going to be brainwashed into becoming a trans person. So these people are violating the own tenets of their own camp within progressivism, and yet they're being awarded left and right all sorts of different treats, such as that newsletter from the Boston Globe that probably the same type of people that have always bought their products are also gonna they're going to sign up for. And what's the meaning of that? Well, this means that all of that sweet cash that these people were earning from the same group of people, the guilty white people, the same cash that they're earning from them, now for whatever reason the Boston Globe has signed them up for a contract, and they're also going to get a little cut of the pie, the Boston Globe and whoever owns them. So that's basically what I'm saying, that liberalism has been more than usurped. It's been usurped and double usurped, and now it's completely syruped up and it's over. And those of us that believe in the original liberal idea, we don't have a home in the modern world, right? Like I was thinking about this, I think about it all the time when I go about my business. Like this week, and I live in a fairly heavily black part of the country, right? Northern Ohio. And I had 3 experiences this week where you can see that this whole notion that society is hopelessly divided by race is a lie. Because I went to, I think it was a supermarket, and I wear something that, I'm not going to say what I wear, but it's one of the things that I wear on the outside. It's a Dallas Cowboys affiliated thing. And so one of the cashiers at the supermarket, he said to me, "What do you think of the Dak Prescott signing?" Because Prescott got this massive contract. I think one of the largest free agent contracts in the history of sports. And I said, these contracts, they're just, it doesn't matter what I said because that's not the point. I said, yeah, it's all about injuries and has nothing to do with whether he's worth it or not. If he can stay healthy, that's the only thing. And that's a very cliched answer, but it's the right answer. And the fact is that the guy who asked me the question, this cashier, was this black guy, probably in his 20s. And he wasn't looking at me as some like random white dude. He saw that I am a fan of this team, and he said he himself is a fan of it. And that's why he engaged me with the question. This week I was also talking to someone about firearms, a person I work with. And he started talking about, I have a 45, Colt 45. I have a Colt 50 revolver that I bought, and he's telling me about how he took his son to the range one time, and his son wanted to fire it, and he showed him how to fire it, and the recoil was amazing, and the son suddenly said, "No, I think I'm gonna pass," and he said, "No, you're gonna do this since I paid for the ammo and I brought this out here." So that guy was also a black guy. And the point is that people can have common interests even though they have almost no common background, or you don't even know their background, right? I didn't know either of these people very well. But because you have a common interest in the same thing, that's something that you can have a conversation about. That's really something that I think the woke intersectionalists can't relate to. That is a liberal idea. It means that Just like 200 years ago, when, despite what social conventions said, if you were a Catholic or a Protestant in Britain, there were certain things that culturally you had in common, whether it was cuisine or music or some of the hymns. Nowadays in America, if you're black, white, or Hispanic, there are common interests that people of all these backgrounds have. And that's really one of the reasons that I think it's difficult for me to really identify with a single political faction, right? Obviously, I don't have many choices in terms of who I vote for. So I'm not talking about that. But I do think it's been, very frustrating just watching the way partisanship has become entrenched. And it's not only the partisanship. As somebody who, I grew up in a Jewish household, and I have people who, relatives and friends who they're like, well, I am not going to buy a German car or buy any German products or anything like that. And my response to that, as someone who is a classical liberal, is that if you really believe, if you're a Christian or whatever religion you are, let's say in this case Jewish, if you believe that there is a such thing as justice in the world, as atonement, you would know that you don't really judge people nowadays for the actions of their ancestors, right? That would be something that would be very unfair to you. Obviously, most people have in their family people who they would be ashamed of going back. Like, yes, there are people who have exceptionally good pedigrees, but we shouldn't be judging people, first of all, by the actions of their own personal ancestors, and secondly, by the actions of people in their native land, decades and decades ago that they've never met and who are not the people who formed their own worldview. I would say Germany, having worked with many people from there who came over here for business, it's come a long way and it's changed. The same thing you could say of Japan. Japan was a very militaristic society before the war. It's not anymore, right? It is very traditional, but it's not a country that invades and rapes other countries anymore. And that's really where I think I stand as somebody who's against all of this identitarian extremism, right? As a classical liberal, I think that we should treat people on an individual basis and not based on their, the actions of their ancestors or certain original sins that were committed by people that they never met. So I think it's been long enough. I hope that you enjoyed this first episode. And I don't know if the rest of this podcast, the further episodes, are going to have the same theme. But there seems no sign of this abating. There's more and more wokeism that's creeping into every facet of society. And I think if you want to continue to support this type of expression, supporting individualism as opposed to collectivism, just follow me on these other platforms. You can follow me on Odyssey, BitChute, or Rumble as alternative video platforms. You can find me on Minds as well. Usually I'll share my stuff on there as well as on Gab. If you want to send a few dollars my way, I'm on Subscribestar. And all of those handles are at the bottom of the screen. And that's about it. I'll talk to you guys later.
We don't need no stinking badges.
Just a little seed makes a big tree, standing on its own, thriving all alone. Just a little seed makes a big tree, grows so high, gonna touch the sky. Just a little seed makes a big tree, spreads roots deep, branches far and wide. Masonic lockdown in your hometown, Masonic lockdown. Can you hear me now? From the top down, soul shock down, state shakedown, mass breakdown, global orders, riding over borders. Get behind your doors for the new world order. Dr. Evil and his needle. Dr. Evil with a master plan, a false vaccine, like a bad dream. The plan to microchip every woman, child and man. The plan to chip us all, to have complete control, the land, the sky, your soul. Peace like silence in the snow. Free to do exactly as you're told. Obey, consume and die. And up to heaven for your pie up in the sky. Sleepwalking, dreaming. You best believe your lying eyes. Geoengineering, making more than patterns in the skies. 5G radiation, beamed to Earth from space by satellites. The scientists and media tricks, trying to tell me 2 and 2 is 5. Excuse me while I mention the strategy of tension, mass mind manipulation, psychological operation. The general population hypnotized right in front of your eyes. Drama and lies, look into my eyes. Just a little seed makes a big tree, standing on its own, thriving all alone. Just a little seed makes a big tree, grows so high, gonna touch the sky. Just a little seed makes a big tree, spreads roots deep, branches far and wide. Masonic lockdown in your hometown. Masonic lockdown, can you feel me now? Masonic lockdown, soul shocked down, stage shakedown, a mass breakdown. Put your muzzle on, get back in your basket, get behind your doors, cause living here is drastic. Dr. Evil and his needle. Dr. Evil with a master plan, a false vaccine, like a bad dream. The plan to microchip every woman, child and man. The plan to chip us all, to have complete control, the land, the sky, your soul. Na na na.